I'm Daniel Gillman, voice of the Purdue volleyball team, and leading up to this 2021 volleyball tournament, I wanted to get a full in-depth breakdown of this 48-team field for you, the volleyball fan. I feel like this is an area that hasn't really been taken advantage of too much, and there isn't too much build-up and bracket breakdowns and total in-depth coverage of the NCAA tournament leading up like I might want or like you might want. So this season, in addition to the bracket breakdown that I did a couple days ago on Sunday, April 4th, with Ed Strong, who's the editor of NCAA Volleyball Scores on Twitter. If you haven't checked that out, go ahead and give that a look. I'm on Twitter at Daniel Gillman, Gillman, and you can find the video there. But in addition to that, I wanted to talk to one reporter or broadcaster that covers every single team in this NCAA tournament. So I went ahead and I sent some Twitter messages. I sent LinkedIn messages. I sent emails and texts, and I tried to accumulate all 48 teams to try to get you the encompassed coverage that you deserve so that you can be the most knowledgeable college volleyball fan around. You can casually bring up the second left side hitter for Pepperdine, or tell me who the defensive specialist that has stood out extremely well this season for Wisconsin is. And so that's what we're doing. We're going to go episode by episode, breaking it up into little segments. This first episode is just going to cover the top 4 teams. We've got Wisconsin, Kentucky, Minnesota, and Texas that get the regional seeds. But this season, it's all taking place in Omaha. So there is no significant advantage to being a top 4 team because you're not going to host the Elite 8 and the Sweet 16, but instead, the top 16 seeds are all going to get buys. We'll go one by one. Coming up next, Jon Arias with Wisconsin is going to lead off our coverage. He's the voice of the Wisconsin Badgers volleyball team. Hope you enjoy all the coverage. Make sure to stay tuned as I continue to post more and more covering all 48 teams leading up to April 14th, the first round, which is a Wednesday, coming from Omaha. We're going to start this breakdown with the number 1 team, the top seed in the Wisconsin Badgers, and I am honored to be joined by the voice of the Badgers up in Madison. He's Jon Arias. Jon, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're going to talk volleyball, you've got to get to Jon. He is a fantastic follow on Twitter and undefeated. I mean, this has been a wild season for Wisconsin. It is their first undefeated season. 15-0 is probably not the number that you were looking for heading into this season, but with a lot of cancellations and unfortunately, here and there, the awkward middle matches like Minnesota where you only play one and then unable to play Penn State, a little bit of a disappointment. But the number 1 overall seed, I believe it's the first time in program history as well, right? So Kelly Sheffield has to be excited. What's the mood around the team?
Yeah, absolutely. Should be thrilled about that. The first time in program history that they are the number 1 seed. I think this team is just ready to play. They've been waiting to play. So it was 1 year, 1 month, and 1 day when they started the season since they lost in the national championship game. They played, and then their season hit that COVID pause in late February. February 21st, they played Michigan State. After that, they took a 2-week break, and they thought, okay, 2 weeks isn't bad. And then they had more COVID cancellations and other types of cancellations from other teams. So they go, they go a year, 1 month and 1 day, they play, then they take a 28-day pause. Then they get one matchup against Minnesota, their highest ranked opponent they faced this season. Then they go on basically another 10-day pause, nothing that they did because of other teams and cancellations. And now you go on an almost 2-week pause at the end of the regular season to the start of the NCAA tournament. So they, in my mind, are just ready to play. They've had this season of starting and stopping, and they're just ready to play and get this tournament started.
And it's not too far away, right? You go to Omaha. I'm sure there's going to be a couple Badger fans that tag along and make their way to the NCAA tournament. Wisconsin will play Thursday at 7 p.m. against the winner of Bowling Green and Weber State, a pair of just one-loss teams, but we're not going to focus too much on that. There's a lot of speculation there. Instead, let's focus on the Badgers. College volleyball fans are used to seeing Dana Rettke dominate, Sydney Hilly set to her, even Lauren Barnes in the last few seasons be a fantastic libero. But talk to me about some of the newcomers, Devin Robinson, Jade Demps, and Georgia Jafita. Who are some of these players and what do they bring to this team?
Well, I'm glad you brought up Devin Robinson and Jay Demps, because those are two players, specifically Devin Robinson, that I'm really going to be focused on during the NCAA tournament. Like you said, you've got Sydney Hilly and Dana Redke, two core pieces of this team that have been so dominant, part of the big reason why they got to the championship game last year. But Devin Robinson, to me, has jumped into college volleyball, not only jumped into college volleyball, jumped into the best conference in college volleyball, and is a star right away through her first 15 matches. And what's really, really great about this year's team is, now we talk about Jay Demps, the depth that they have, that they can, if needed, plug somebody else in there. And they've got this highly talented, athletic outside that competes against all these other great players on a regular basis in practice and things like that. And they can put in these pieces if needed. That's the case. And so the depth there has you feeling pretty comfortable about Wisconsin, that not only do they have the superstars, the established stars that can get it done, that have gotten it done, but they've got these great talented young players that can step in. And I can't wait to see what happens when someone like Devin Robinson gets her first taste of the NCAA tournament.
I mean, she's hitting over 420. It is really out of control, has not missed a set yet. And in the few matches that I got to see her play early in the season against Purdue, she looked like a veteran. But Jon, I do want to look on the other side of things. I mean, you guys have dropped 3 sets. That's a lot of lost volleyball there. What are the few times that your Badgers have looked a little human?
Well, I'm having a tough time judging this team simply because Purdue, the team you're very familiar with, is their best competition really to date. And that was at the start of the season. So that's after a year break. And I knew Purdue wasn't at full strength either. And so that's the best competition. Minnesota, you'd say, well, what about Minnesota? They were missing their starting libero and their starting setter. So although Wisconsin looked great for not having played a month against a very good Minnesota team, Minnesota wasn't at full strength. So, part of me wonders, what will this team look like when they face their best competition to date, which will come in the NCAA tournament? Cross your fingers if they continue to advance as far as we think they're going to advance. How do they respond to that? But here's something else that got me thinking last night when I was trying to figure out how they're going to do in the tournament is they may not have a lot of on-court competition against higher quality teams aside from Purdue at the start of the year, but they do practice against the best team in the country every day. And so that kind of gave me some confidence. Not only do they practice against each other, and they talk about the competitions and the scrimmages and the practices they have and how it is so competitive. And that's exactly what the coaching staff wants. They want competition because competition brings out the best in players. And so that gives me some comfort as a Badger fan, knowing that they have played against the best players in maybe in the entire NCAA, and that's themselves.
Now, we'll wrap it up with this. It's definitely not a typical number 1 seed draw, right? I mean, you've got BYU as a 16 seed, 16-1, usually a national contender. Heather Olmstead puts together perennial powerhouses, or maybe UCLA, a team that just missed out on being a national seed, 14-6 over in California. They're going to take on Rider. So if they get by Rider, they'll play BYU. And of course, a Gator, I have to bring up the fact that we may get that rematch of Wisconsin and Florida coming up in the Elite Eight, or an Ohio State team that is really talented. So Wisconsin is definitely not going to face the level of competition that we've seen throughout this season. Last question here for you, Jon. What is one area of the team that is a little bit human, as I mentioned? What's the exploitable portion of the Wisconsin Badgers?
That's a really tough question, because I start thinking, all right, defensively, well, Lauren Barnes has been perfect, especially late of the matches she's been able to play. She's really picked up her production and she's steady. Is it at the net? Well, Dana Redke led the Big Ten in blocks per set, so it's not at the net. And I'm not trying to be like coy, like, oh, they don't have any weaknesses. I'm seriously trying to find the one that I think would be the most exploitable. Is it offensively? Well, if you don't go to Grace Loberg or Molly Haggerty, you can go to Dana Redke or Danielle Hart or Devin Robinson. So it's stacked there. I feel comfortable with any of those players if needed. And if you can get the ball to them leading this team, is it's serving. They've got one of the best servers in the Big Ten in Izzy Ashburn. And maybe it is serving, maybe it is that, when they looked a little sloppy this last weekend, it was because they weren't passing so well against Michigan, but that didn't last so long. So, I think maybe it just comes down to volleyball kind of 101. If you face a team that perhaps has great serving, it disrupts what this great offense can do. And that gets back to passing. So I'm not saying that that's an area of weakness. I'm saying if they fall, that could be one of the reasons they fall. Maybe they just face a great serving team. And if you can't get that offense turned out, well, now you're relying on your defense. And can your defense keep you in it long enough to have those bright moments of offense to push you over the top and get you to the next round?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's going to take a near perfect effort and a little bit of April madness to see if Wisconsin gets tested here in the next few weeks. Jon, thank you so much for joining me.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. He's the voice of the Wisconsin Badgers, Jon Arias. We'll be back from Madison down to Lexington. It's time for the 2 seed, the Kentucky Wildcats, getting their best seed in program history. And for Coach Craig Skinner, it's just more of the same. As I welcome in now Hunter Mitchell. He covers the team and is a co-host for Cameron Mills Radio over in Lexington. Hunter, how you doing today?
I'm great, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. I mean, I get to talk volleyball. It's a lot, and I'm doing a lot of talking, but it's volleyball. It's the tournament. And for a team like Kentucky, it probably has felt like forever that when this season started, right? It was the fall season. Yeah. Then you have the SEC. Then you have the second half of the year, finally get that first loss in a heartbreaker to Florida, but an incredible bounce back match, sweeping the Gators in Gainesville, nabbing the number 2 seed, and in a draw that I'm sure Big Nation is happy with, right?
Yeah. And I think it's funny because so many of the draws for the last, I always look at the last 4 years, especially because that's kind of when you kind of really started seeing that tradition of Kentucky volleyball changing. The last 4 years just haven't really been kind to the Cats. They've gotten these draws where they've just run into a Nebraska or a Washington every time in the Elite Eight or the Sweet 16, and it just kind of messes them up. So I think they're looking at this one a little bit more grateful. They still got some tough outs, obviously, before that Final Four potential matchup, but they've definitely got a better draw than I think they've had in the past.
No, I mean, I would say that they have one of the best draws that they have had in a while. Illinois State is definitely not a team to look past, and neither is UNLV. I was just chatting with a beat writer for UNLV that you'll hear from in a little bit, but it is one of those things where no reason to speculate. Let's just focus on the Wildcats. And how often does a team graduate a stud like Leah Edmond and maybe get better, right?
Yeah, and I think that was kind of my biggest question heading into the season was because you were losing such an offensive talent in Leah Edmond. I mean, I don't think most people would argue that she truly is probably the best athlete to come through the program, in this entire school's history. So, we knew they were getting the number 1 recruiting class. We knew they had, Madison Lilly, Gabby Curry, Allie Stumler, some seniority coming back. But when you lose that caliber of a player, you do wonder, what is this team going to be able to do? Are they just going to be good, or are they going to actually be able to take that next step? And I have been thoroughly impressed with this team's, especially the freshmen, their ability to step into some of those key roles and really not miss a beat. And they dealt with an injury bug in the fall that they really didn't seem to bother them. They had some adversity in the spring with some canceled matches, and then obviously having to play a tougher opponent in Arkansas to kick things off, and then going on the road to Florida and playing Florida. And it just kind of seems like every time you wonder and you question about this team, they step to that challenge and they almost exceed it. So yeah, it's been really impressive what Craig and what the staff have been able to do in the wake of losing someone like Leah. That is for sure.
The stat that baffles me, and I'm looking at it here, is just the sets, right? I mean, there's a couple sets lost in October, 1 to Tennessee, 2 in 2 matches to Missouri. But then aside from the 5-set loss to Florida, that was a come from behind effort by the Gators, it's only Mississippi that has taken a set from these Wildcats here in the spring. There are a few players in college volleyball that you want them to succeed, right? You see the trials and the tribulations. And I think Avery Skinner is right there on that top line of players that stand out as a freshman. And then you see that regression. There were a lot of reasons, health involved, a lot of things coming in, personal life. And then she takes a backseat her sophomore year. And, you don't know if they're going to, give her a chance. Here she comes dominating in 2021, 211 kills. But more than that, more than just the quantity here, Mitchell, is the fact that she's hitting 370. Would you consider Skinner to be this team's X factor? I guess there's two Skinners. Would you consider Avery to be this team's X factor?
I think you have to. I think Avery's story is one of those stories in volleyball that just makes you happy to see, right? She came in as a freshman and we saw her in that NCAA tournament. She was dynamite. I mean, they had Leah Edmonds, so Leah Edmonds stole the show. But what Avery did against BYU and even against WKU when they came back from being down 0-2, she hits the ball harder than any outside hitter I've ever seen, including Leah Edmonds. Leah Edmonds is a phenomenal talent, but when Avery makes contact with the ball, it sounds like she's going to put a hole in the floor. And I mean, even that match against Florida, you saw some kills that there was not a snowball's chance in hell it was coming back up because she just contacts the ball, so hard. And I think that her evolution, as a freshman, you almost saw a lot of times if she started off a game and she wasn't scoring significant or consistently, if she got off to a couple of errors quickly, it almost felt like she couldn't get out of that. She fell in that rut and she couldn't overcome that. That doesn't happen this season. You see her shaking off, oh, I got blocked. Oh, I hit it out. I'm going to come back and I'm going to nail it the next time. And it's been so cool to see her growth as an athlete, but even as a person. She's always so gracious in post-game interviews and the way she carries herself on the court. But yeah, she really has become an X factor for this team. And I think her, along with Ali Stumler, has been such a great 1-2 punch for this team. Again, in light of losing a talent like Leah Edmond, you don't notice it because of the way those two have really blended together and worked well together.
16th season for Craig Skinner, 16th consecutive trip to the NCAA tournament for Big Blue. A 7 p.m. start against the winner of Illinois State and UNLV on Thursday. And then you've got Washington State on the other side of the bracket. It's been Washington, it's been Nebraska for 4 straight years for Skinner. And he has to be happy to not see Washington. But I'm going to go out there on that limb, and I'm sure I'll get some heat from the Cougars. But I think this is Western Kentucky's top half of the sub-regional, right? They seem like the 15 seed in my mind. They've looked like the 15 seed. Mm-hmm. Washington State has had one of those seasons where they've split with a couple teams and they haven't really been dominant against any good Pac-12 teams. You got to be just tingling at the potential of a Western Kentucky third round matchup, right?
Yeah, as soon as I saw that in the bracket, I thought, man, that match would be one of the ones to circle. Like, man, if we get that, that'd be a good one. Because again, you have that history there with 4 years ago. They come to Kentucky with Kentucky's arguably best team ever to that point. They've got, Kentucky has a top 4 seed. A lot of people thought Nebraska should have gotten that. Maybe they should have because they eventually won the title that year. And they're hosting, and it looks like they're, going to potentially go all the way, to the Elite Eight at least. And Western Kentucky came out and punked them the first 2 sets. And I was sitting there going, man, this might end early. And it kind of took a miraculous comeback for the Cats to win that one. So there's history there. And then you look at WKU's offense. Kentucky, as great as they've been offensively, WKU is right on their heels. I mean, both of those teams are within a couple of percentage points in terms of hitting percentage on the year. And as good as Kentucky has been offensively, WKU is right there. And so, yeah, I do like that matchup. I think WKU can give Washington State a lot of trouble. And if they get past them and the Cats get to that Sweet 16, that would be a heck of a match. And one that I think would be really exciting just as a volleyball fan in the sport to watch a match like that with an offensive, kind of showcase that would eventually could be.
Yeah, sign me up for the amount of talent that is just in this specific sub-regional because Illinois State has the horses to run with anyone. Western Kentucky and Jackson State undefeated. Washington State has the lengthy and the skyscraping studs. And then, of course, all of those studs that we just talked about with Kentucky. Hunter, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely, man. It was my pleasure.
He's Hunter Mitchell, co-host of Cameron Mills Radio, covering Kentucky volleyball down in Lexington. We're going to head out to Minneapolis next and talk about the 3 seed Minnesota. We're on to the number 3 seed, and that's the top right bracket as the Minnesota Golden Gophers nab that 3 seed. And I am happy to be joined by the sports reporter for the Minnesota Daily, Brendan O'Brien. Brendan covers the Gophers volleyball team all season long. And how you doing today?
Great, Daniel. How are you doing?
I can't complain. I get to talk volleyball all week long over the next few weeks, leading up until the tournament and all tournament long. As you take a look at this draw, what's the first thing that stands out to you Were you kind of expecting a top 4 seed? Obviously, this season, you're not going to be hosting the regionals, but it does put, Minnesota in a good spot.
Yeah, overall, I think I was kind of expecting them to be one of the top 4 teams. Obviously, coming into the season, they weren't necessarily ranked in the top 5, but they've been kind of hovering over within the top 5 and then moving into the top 3 in the most recent weeks. So yeah, I don't think this was a surprise to myself, the Gophers volleyball team, or other fans. So it definitely makes sense.
Well, volleyball fans are used to seeing Hugh McCutcheon not just on their screen for Selection Sunday, but all postseason long. Last season, another trip to the Final Four, but a 3-set loss to Stanford. I wouldn't say a whole new team, but replacing a setter is always going to be something that leaves a lot of mystery. But Melanie Schaffmaster, the Indiana native, she has been phenomenal. Only a couple losses this season for Minnesota. They split the series with Nebraska, and then with that postponement, they were only able to play Wisconsin once. What have you seen from Schaffmaster and Minnesota's synergy throughout this season?
I think where it was really noticeable for me personally was in the one match against Wisconsin, because Schaffmaster was out with some sort of upper body injury, and watching her play throughout the first few matches, I guess things were obviously going seamlessly, and you couldn't tell whether she was making really noticeable mistakes or if things went wrong, if it was in other areas. But when she was out and they had their other 2 setters, you could tell that obviously um, that they just hadn't had as much time working with the outside hitters and making sure that they were passing them the ball well. And then on top of it too, Schaffmaster is pretty tall. I believe she stands at 6'3". So I think where that's a little bit underrated is her defensive presence too. So overall, I mean, stepping in as a freshman at the setting position, she's done a great job of setting up teammates, and she's got a lot of great outside teammates to help out too.
Perfect segue. Yeah, I got to see Schaffmaster in those come from behind 5-set victories at Purdue. And in her home state, she did not disappoint. The serving has been on for Minnesota this season as well. The team has 84 aces, just 68 service errors. But Brendan, you talk about the help on the outside. You can't mention Minnesota without talking about what's going to be a 4-time first-team All-American, right, in Stephanie Samity. But who around Samity really helps by drawing some attention at the front line?
Yeah, I think it's really a 3-headed monster as far as their hitting game goes. Samity is obviously the leader there. But then Adana Rollins, who's another player that actually had a great NCAA tournament last year when they made it to the Final Four. And then they also bring in Taylor Landfair, who's only what in some projections was the number 1 recruit coming in. So
only the number 1 recruit.
Right, exactly. So obviously they are pretty loaded there as well. And we were talking a little bit before off the mic, but they still have good middle blockers in Reagan Pittman and Shea Rubright, but they just haven't been getting as involved offensively, much better defensively. So we'll look for that and see if that kind of changes at the first few rounds of the tournament.
Yeah, keep your eye on Landfair on the outside. She is someone that the casual volleyball fan may not know, but everyone that is locked in this season, they know that she has been a stud. 167 kills. That's second on the team behind Samity. Last question here for you, Brendan. I don't want to speculate on who the team might play, so let's keep it just Minnesota-centric.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to play the winner of Georgia Tech and Lipscomb, but this has been a team that has gone through a lot of difficulty, adversity. Obviously, with the season in itself has been tough with cancellations, but we've seen CeCe McGraw give up that libero jersey due to injuries, due to sickness. We've seen Jenna Wennis come into the back line, and even the transfer, Katie Myers, get benched of sorts for that middle rubright, as you mentioned. What of sorts has this season been for Hugh McCutcheon? Because in my opinion, it's one of his most impressive coaching jobs.
I definitely think it's really impressive, especially with McGraw going out and how they've kind of bounced back in these past few weeks after, on top of it, having matches postponed due to COVID right in the middle when they were doing really well in the season. So if they didn't have that disruption, who knows how they would have done against teams like Ohio State and teams like Michigan. But I think what's been really like obvious is one, the recruiting job he's done, bringing in players like Wennis and Landfair who are able to step in and get more playing time and keep this thing rolling. And then on top of it, I think what's really important is they're finding ways against opponents when the really top tier teams, what they'll try to do is they'll send blockers Samity's way more often. And so sometimes you can tell that things might not be getting going for her right away. But then players like Rollins and Landfair will kind of pick up the, attacking on the outsides. And then on top of it, even though McGraw's a really great player in the back row, having Wennis in the back row she's actually listed on the Gophers roster as a hitter. So that gives them a little bit more options offensively too, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Rachel Kilkelly has filled in admirably for CeCe McGraw. It's almost like, that rotating, you lose Lauren Barnes, you get McGraw, you lose McGraw, you get Kilkelly. Brendan, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Daniel.
Absolutely. He's the sports reporter for the Minnesota Daily, Brendan O'Brien. We'll wrap up this first episode covering the national seeds with the 4th seed. One of the best teams in the nation, one of the top teams over the last few years in the Texas Longhorns. And I'm joined by ESPN play-by-play broadcaster Tyler Denning, who lives down in the area and has covered the Longhorns over the past few seasons on the Longhorn Network, on ESPN, all over the place. Tyler, talk to me about this Texas team, because I am surprised that the 4 seed is where they wound up. Is that kind of the thinking around the organization, that maybe they got a little shortchanged?
I think nationally that there were, some people that were surprised. I was surprised. Texas does have the lone loss to Rice, which opened some eyes, but, to expect a team to play perfect over the course of a season, especially one as unique as this, Texas, I think unique to all these other schools, especially the power programs, being that they played their conference portion back in the fall. So that's where the Big 12 was decided. They go perfect throughout Big 12 play, which I think was very impressive. The 2 matches myself and Salima Rockwell had were against Baylor. That figured to be their stiffest competition, and they swept both of those matches. They actually ended up playing Baylor again in the spring in 2 more matches that didn't count to the conference schedule, but they ended up winning those as well. So I think a little surprising, maybe more a testament to where the Big 12 was at this year. And that there wasn't a benefit of non-conference play in Texas, who traditionally plays such a hard non-conference schedule, in getting that. But I think within the top 4, they definitely deserving of being in there.
Yeah, I think one thing, everyone's harping on the Rice loss, but they're overlooking that 3-set win over a Texas State team that then went to Baylor and beat the Bears. So I feel like, the end of the season is always something that's hard to get motivation from Elliott's crew. And so I tend to overlook 1 or 2 tough stumbles down the road. Last season, Texas was a 2 seed, unable to get out though and really push the envelope. They lost to Louisville 2 seasons ago, swept by BYU in that Elite 8 game. So it seems like, is this the culmination of everything that Jared Elliott's been working for, that maybe this could be the team that finally pushes through to the Final Four?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of extra motivation in our conversations with Coach Elliott and their leader in Logan Eggleston, who is having or had a player of the year type year. And I figure her to be right in that mix. She had talked about after that loss to Louisville and going through and watching the national semifinal and the final match and not wanting to have that feeling again. I think Texas is always known for their athleticism and the talent that they have at both pins in the middle as well. It's never for lack of talent with Texas, but I think what's different with this roster, more so than all the other years, is the depth that they have defensively at the libero position. They definitely have had that. Morgan O'Brien coming in. Nalani Osio has been big as a freshman, but they have a lot of depth. 3 different players that they can throw with Sydney Peterson at that position that really shores up their passing. Any volleyball fan or the analysts that I've worked with, they always stress on it doesn't matter how good your offense is if your passing isn't there to get it. So that defensive back line, Eggleston as well, being a quality 6 rotation player is so good. And then Texas, when they can get into their offense, they are always so hard to stop. Skylar Fields is still such a young player that's supremely talented, but they have those pieces. But I think in the conversations with the coaching staff over at Texas and then the analysts across, the ESPN ecosystem, that this is as deep of a Texas team as they have ever seen. And you add that to the athleticism that they always have, it's going to make Texas a very dangerous out throughout the tournament.
O'Brien has that Final Four experience with Illinois, transfers over to Texas, and doesn't miss a step. You mentioned the depth, and something I like to ask to a lot of these high-profile teams is we know Butler and Eggleston and Fields. They are staples in college volleyball fandom. Who is 1 or 2 names that we might want to keep an eye on as the casual volleyball fan that may step up and really stand out as an X factor?
That's a good question, because I think with Texas, that's interesting as well. They have Molly Phillips, who plays, but could easily start for probably any other team in the country and could start for Texas as well throughout the tournament. And then they added Melanie Pata, who's a true freshman that has some experience at the national level down with the Mexican national team. And she was an addition that was, I believe, on campus at the fall, but was eligible to then come play within the spring season as well. And that gives them another player who's a 6 rotation player. And the name that's been thrown out amongst the analysts and the coaching staff for Texas is Amy Neal, a player that played 4 years and was really good for them and led to some good stuff in the tournament. But I think Texas has added a couple pieces, even from fall to spring, that gives them even more depth along with those other big names that you talk about.
And then last question here, just from the fans that watched that most recent Baylor match, how many times are you going to serve out of bounds on set point and match point? Nearly 100 more service errors than aces. Could that be the one thing that might lead to the Texas upset this postseason?
Possibly, but I've talked a lot with associate head coach Tanya Johnson about this, and I think that this is also the best Texas serving team that they have. Eggleston has really developed that as a weapon. Nalani Yosia is a young player for them that has a really good jump serve that they like. So if you look at the ace numbers, they're up for Texas, and that I think gives them another weapon. But you also look at the error numbers from the service line, and that's something that, come these tight matches against quality opponents down the stretch, if you're playing tight sets, 5th set potentially, you cannot afford to give away those free points. So I think just like any team, it's walking that fine line between aggression at the service line and not giving away points.
Yeah, we're going to find out if that rest versus rust conversation comes up. Texas will play 7 p.m. Eastern time, Thursday, the 15th, against the winner of Wright State and Samford. Wright State, a very talented team out of the Horizon. I've called a couple of their matches this season, and they could provide a little bit of a punch up the front with a little bit of size. But Tyler, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. A pleasure to be here, and look forward to watching the tournament.
Yeah, cannot wait. We are just days away. He is Tyler Denning, ESPN play-by-play broadcaster, and that'll wrap up our first episode breaking down the regional seeds. Tomorrow, keep an eye out for the 5, 6, 7, and 8 seeds right here on YouTube or Twitter.